Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
As we do every Thursday, we jump into our time machine for Throwback Thursday. And this week, you'll hear my conversation with Graig Kreindler, one of my favorite Twitter follows and one of the best sports artists you'll ever see. He paints classic scenes from back in baseball's golden era. When we spoke 17 months ago, he previewed his big exhibit coming to the Negro League Museum in Kansas City. Well, a few days ago, that exhibit officially opened. It includes more than 200 of his color studies of legendary Negro Leaguers and early era Black and Hispanic ball players. If you'd like to see it, it'll be there till the end of May. So if you go to Kansas City for, say, the Royals Astros series in early May, then you can double dip at the Negro League Museum. For more of Graig's work, his website is graigkreindler.com. That's Graig spelled Graig, and he's at Graig Kreindler on Twitter. Without further ado, time to hop in the time machine. Well, you've got this real affection for the baseball legends of the past, and I'm talking 60, 70, 80 years ago or more. I've got a fascination with that era too. What drew you into those players in that whole period?
I think my kind of love of it was germinated from my father's baseball card collection. He is a child of the 40s and 50s, and that's kind of like in the late 40s and early 50s was his primo time for collecting stuff. And he grew up in New York, so he was a big Yankee fan, and he, unlike, I guess, a lot of people his age, he didn't have all of his baseball cards thrown out by his parents, only some of them. So he was able to kind of hold on to them. And when I was young, I kind of always gravitated towards them, especially like the late 40s Bowman and early 50s Topps cards, because they were illustrated and, rather than photographs. So being somebody who really liked to draw, it was kind of like, oh, wow, I could, maybe make my own baseball cards. And I don't know who these players are. I know who Don Mattingly is, and I know like Ricky Henderson is, but who's Mickey Mantle? Who's Yogi Berra? And my father would, kind of like sit me down on the proverbial knee and give me an education. So I kind of fell in love with his era and, the era before then. And, as a result, kind of ended up being like the only kid in my elementary school who knew who Bobby Richardson or Gil McDougald was.
Yeah. Did today's players, do they have the same character when you're trying to draw them in their face that the legends of the past do?
Some of them do. I mean, some of them look interesting. Like there's certain quirks about them that I think are really interesting. Like I know he just retired, but Ichiro is one of those guys who just has a very distinct look, a very distinct style. And I guess I'm drawn to them differently than I am those older guys. I think the seduction of painting somebody like Babe Ruth or Lou Gehrig or anyone from that era is that, they kind of only exist in black and white to the majority of baseball fans. You don't see them from 8,000 different angles, on SportsCenter like you do with today's players. So there's kind of an allure to that era more so, I guess, than the modern guys.
Yeah, when I think of the guys from this time period, they might not have the wrinkles and the crinkles and all that stuff in their face, but there's guys like Mike Trout and Aaron Judge that look like they're almost chiseled out of granite or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Like they're like monsters.
What are some of the guys that have been your favorite players to depict? And I'm all in on your Jackie Robinson paintings, not only incredible, but Jackie's one of my heroes. I would assume he's probably in your favorites group because I've seen you put up a lot of Jackie pictures. But do you have other favorites and is Jackie one of those?
Yeah. Jackie's definitely one of them. I unfortunately I don't get to paint him as much as I would like to, because right now I'm kind of, I mean, I don't want to like paint a sob story, but like I'm kind of limited to I guess painting the guys that I'm commissioned to paint, because that's kind of all I have time for right now. But it seems like less and less people go after Jackie Robinson. They're always after Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig and Mickey Mantle. So those are the guys who I end up painting the most. But if it was up to me, I would paint Jackie more. I would probably paint like Carl Hubble a couple of, 1,000 times more. It's hard to pick a favorite. It's kind of like I see a guy, and in some cases a girl, and I'm gravitated towards their look. And if it's not a player that a lot of people know about, I mean, even if they're a Hall of Famer, they still might not be widely known by baseball fans. I'm just attracted to them, and I'm kind of attracted to bringing them back to life, or hoping to bring them back to life and educate people in a way, and just kind of like introduce them to sports fans.
Have you met any of the players that you've painted? And if so, what was their reaction?
I've met a couple. I was telling you off mic that I did something for the Bob Fletcher Museum a while back, and the painting I did of him, I got to present it to him. It was about a year or two before he passed away, and that was one of the coolest experiences ever, because this was at like a big convention hall, and the painting is kind of just standing on an easel, and I'm in this room that it's just like me, my agent, and I guess Bob Feller's assistant or handler or whatever. And Bob comes in and he looks at the painting, before even like saying anything to me, and he kind of like stops like dead in his tracks, and he's looking at it, and he's like, that's, and he just kind of stumbles his words, and he says, "That's the best damn painting I've ever seen." And it actually, like, it felt really genuine. And he was just like super appreciative of the fact that, I guess, that I did the painting of him, and he thought that I got all of the details of the day correct, and I had done my research and all this, and he was such a genuinely good dude, and meeting him was amazing. Like shaking his hand. I mean, the guy at the time, he was like 91 or 92, and it was just still like an iron grip. And his body, he was only like 5'6", 5'7", not that much taller than me, but it was just, he was thick, he was like a slab of meat, and still at like 91 or 92 years old. It was wild.
Yeah, he passed away at 92, so you must have met him right before he passed away. So that had to be really fortunate for you to get a chance to meet him.
Absolutely.
I got to ask you, because we do Houston sports on my show, and have you had a chance to paint any Astros or Colt 45s over the years?
Unfortunately, I have yet to paint any Astros, and I'm very sad about that. I mean, because I would love to paint some Astros. I mean, whether it's like current guys. I mean, Altuve looks so cool. I would love to paint him. Verlander also. But even like some of the guys from the 70s with the great Tequila Sunrise jerseys, like, oh my God. I would love to paint any of those guys. I really would. I think until things kind of calm down in my life personally, like we have 2 young children that are eating up basically all of my time. Once they kind of grow up a little bit and maybe start going to school, then I could start focusing on doing more stuff for inventory. And then I could probably jump on some Astros, which I definitely would look forward to.
Yeah, those old ballparks, when you're paying a lot of the guys that you do from the past generations, the ballparks, I think I can't remember who I'm quoting on this one, but they would say, somebody would say they look like the inside of an Easter egg with all the colors. And to me, from your perspective, I would assume that the old Astrodome would be a real fun backdrop to paint with all of its intricacies and stuff like that behind you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in the 90s or mid 90s or late 90s when it was kind of like in vogue to bring back the ballparks that were of like the earlier styles, like the ballparks that were like smack in neighborhoods, I feel like it was almost taboo to kind of look back at places like the Astrodome or RFK and be like, wow, those stadiums were really beautiful. But they were. I mean, they were different than, I guess, the kind of ballparks that you were seeing in the 40s and 50s, but there was something about them. Each one kind of had its own unique character, even if they were kind of cookie cutters in a way. They were just like, there's something so maybe it's kind of out of school for me to say this because I don't live in Houston, but there just seems something so Houston about the Astrodome, if that makes any sense.
Bigger than life. It's Texas. I think that's the thing that you think about with the Astrodome. And the funny thing is, if you haven't been here, it's basically dwarfed by NRG Stadium where the Texans play. That's right next door. So it looks like this little bitty baby brother next to it. But luckily, one of the cool things is just recently they made it a historical landmark, and it's going to stick around. They're repurposing it. That's been a constant debate here in Houston for years. So we're happy that the Astrodome gets a chance to live on. The expense of keeping it up was, I think, a big thing with people, but also the expense of tearing it down wasn't going to be cheap either. So yeah, it's good. The Astrodome's staying around. So maybe someday you'll get a chance to come down here. It won't be the same because they're going to redo some of the inside, but maybe you'll get a chance to see it in person at one point.
As long as they're not going to touch the ceiling, I hope. I mean, that's like the quintessential Astrodome thing to me.
Yeah, it's still got this, the seats that it has in it, and I would assume that some of that stuff's going to come out, but they still have all the different colors of the rainbow, basically, the seats in there at this point. But unfortunately, that I think might change, though.
All right, well, we'll see. Either way, I mean, even if I can't do anything of the Astrodome, and from modern day, I can at least go back in time where there's plenty of photography and draw from there. But yeah, that ballpark is something else. I mean, I would have loved to have seen a game there.
So, Greg, I want to ask you about just the research of how you come about doing these drawings, and I'm sure you're maybe picking up stuff from old photos, but I know there's a lot of just reading that goes into this for you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a little different now because I guess the internet is so wide-reaching, but I used to kind of spend so much time in libraries just kind of like perusing microfilm files of newspapers. I was just kind of amazed at the kind of information that I could get from them. I mean, whether we were talking about the particular uniforms that a team would be wearing during a specific year, or something as insignificant or seemingly insignificant as just the color of an advertisement in the ballpark. That stuff is gold for me. A lot of the research really happens in the library, or I guess here on the internet, or through whatever books I have, or emailing other historians and having dialogues with them. It's kind of a never-ending process. With each painting, there's always kind of at least one major speed bump or roadblock or whatever that I have to kind of traverse through. If I was doing this kind of work 20 years ago, I don't even know if I would be able to do it. So thank God for the internet, I guess.
Do you have a favorite book that's maybe the history of the game that is maybe your go-to, or what you would recommend? I mean, I'm a big fan of Glory of Their Times and Summer of '49, Boys of Summer, books like that. Those
are great. I guess I'm kind of all over the place where there are certain kind of biographies that I really enjoy. Like Jonathan Ives' book about Lou Gehrig and Jackie Robinson. Those books are great. Jane Levy's books about Sandy Koufax and Mickey Mantle, those were great. She's actually coming out with a Babe Ruth one in October, I think, too. So I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, I mean, Glory of Their Times is absolutely classic. If I can find books that are kind of, I don't know if fringe is the right word, but if they deal with the subject matter that isn't necessarily going to be, your typical New York Times bestseller, that sort of stuff I get really drawn to. I think Caitlin Murphy had a book about just the 1908 season and kind of everything that happened there with the pennant race between the Giants and the Cubs and Fred Merkle. And, it's like a topic that you wouldn't normally see a whole entire book dedicated to. But that stuff is really appealing to me.
What's been your most difficult, or who's been the most difficult subject?
I would say that the players of the 19th century I find to be really hard to paint, usually because the reference material that I get for them, the photography, is just not really great. I mean, it was still kind of the birth of the medium, so the quality of the imagery is not great. Also, the kind of information about the players, physical information, is a bit tough to come by, finding hair color and eye color. I feel like a lot of that stuff kind of ends up being guesswork on my part. Jerseys are a little easier to come by. There's a website that was started, I think, about a year, maybe 2 years ago, called Threads of Our Game. That is it's basically a database for all known uniforms from the 19th century. Starting from like the 1850s, I think, onto 1900. All the information is gotten from newspapers, so it's all kind of like. You have primary sources for all of that research, which is wonderful. That stuff is hard, but also the project that I have going on now with the Negro Leaguers is also incredibly hard, and also just it's for the same reason in that there isn't great photography out there of these guys and the uniforms that they wore, and I guess for different reasons. Any subject matter that's not really widely known or that we don't have a lot of information on, those are usually the hardest.
You just mentioned the project with the Negro League Museum. Tell people about what you're doing with that.
Basically, I was commissioned by a client up in the Pacific Northwest to do, at this point, it's 200 small portraits. They're just like 5 by 7 inches each. 200 of them for a show that he's going to be having at the Negro League Museum in Kansas City in the spring of 2020. And the show is to kind of celebrate the centennial of the formation of the Negro National League in 1920. So this guy, he has a huge collection of artifacts of like Negro League memorabilia and, stuff that goes kind of like beyond baseball cards. We're talking like bats and stuff like related to civil rights issues of the day. And he's commissioned me to do all of those paintings. He's commissioned a few other artists to do other pieces as well, and it's basically just going to be this big extravaganza, hopefully in 2020. And it's just at the point where right now I've done about half of the paintings that he's commissioned me to do. It keeps getting harder because some of these guys that he's asking me to do, it's these are guys that I think most baseball fans might not have heard of, and you don't really have many photographs of them in existence. So it's been a big challenge, but hopefully in the end, when all is said and done, I'm hoping that it'll kind of throw the Negro Leagues into the limelight and kind of educate a lot of people about them.
I want to ask because one of my close friends, he's a big fan of your work. He's interested in prints of your work. What can people do to get prints of your work, or can they do that? Do you have that available?
Unfortunately, right now, I'm unable to do prints. I can only do originals. The reason being, in order to do prints kind of like legally and to do it right, there's so many different intellectual properties and conglomerates that need to kind of be paid in order to kind of do it right. So, like, if I have a painting of Mickey Mantle and I want to make a print of it, in order to sell it, I would need to get licenses from MLB, from the people who represent Mickey Mantle's estate, from the MLB Players Association, and if I'm working directly from a photograph, if it's owned by like AP or Getty. I would have to also get licenses from them. In the end, combining that with the cost of actually like making prints or lithos or giclées, it just becomes incredibly expensive. It's a bit more money than I can put into it at this moment. But I'm hoping in the future I might be able to do something. For what it's worth, the collector who's in charge of the Negro Leagues exhibit, he actually has the rights to put out prints and reproductions of the Negro League stuff that I do for him. So if you were to go to his website, you would be able to get some stuff, but it would just be, Negro League related.
The coolest thing I could think of would be baseball cards of your work. That would be pretty sweet.
That's the dream. He's actually working or in talks with some companies to kind of get a baseball card set together, as well as maybe getting a book released. And that that would be it. If I were to like open a pack of cards or something like that, and I see my work, my head would explode. I think. It would just be amazing.
Tell people where they can find your stuff. I mentioned your website. Let people know about that, and any more places where people maybe could see it in person.
You can check out my work at graigkreindler.com. It's GraigKreindler. And you can find me on most social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, even like Pinterest and like Tumblr. You can also, if you want to check out what's going on with the Negro League Centennial Project, you can go to that website, which is just negroleagueshistory.com. And seeing my work in person, I guess the two places that I can think of that you can see it in public, you can see a painting of Yogi Berra and Don Larson at the Yogi Berra Museum in Montclair, New Jersey. Or if you happen to be in Cleveland, if you're at Progressive Field, I'm pretty sure that the painting I did for the Bob Fletcher Museum is still hanging there, because I know the museum dissolved a couple of years back, and I know that the ballpark had it for a few years. I'm just not sure if they still have it this year. Just
keep the head of your Yogi Berra. You can put a little Astros uniform on him, because he spent that time as the coach. Although the face is much older when he was the head coach of the Astros.
You know what though? But wearing that cool jersey makes up for it. So
yeah,
that would still work for me. I'd be very happy to do it.
And there's no more character in a face of a player than Yogi, I would think.
No, it doesn't get much better than him. Pretty much like any stretch of his life, it doesn't get much better than him.
Well, I'm going to put some of that information into the show description, and I hope people, if you haven't, go check out his website, see some of his work, because it's really special. Thanks so much for doing this, Graig. It was good to catch up with you.
Yeah, same here, Robert. Thank you so much for having me on.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.